Hello and welcome everyone. Today, Zoom meeting, I'm going to be talking about Chiron. And Chiron is a particular, I guess we call him an asteroid, but there's disagreement as far as what Chiron actually is out there as a planetary body. But in the astrological chart, Chiron represents the wounded healer. And for some reason lately, Chiron has been really prominent with me to talk about it and to explore it for myself. And so hence this is how we end up with this material. So I'm excited to go through it today. There are some things that I have been working on with myself that I'm sharing, and I will be especially interested to hear feedback and everyone else's experiences with Chiron. So hopefully we will have plenty of time to look at examples, and then for anyone else also to raise questions. So to start off, Chiron in astrology, to me, represents the vulnerable part of ourselves that we overcompensate for or that we avoid, and sometimes both. And the reason why we do that is because Chiron is the wound that we believe somehow cannot be healed. So we tend to not put effort in trying to make it better because we don't believe it can be better, and this is oftentimes very unconscious. So it's the weak spot you don't want exposed, and that you don't oftentimes want to face yourself, and that you just don't feel capable in. And you know, these signatures can manifest in many different ways, but I find that people tend with Chiron either to extremely overcompensate, so that, in other words, no one would ever see that I'm weak here if I have so much strength showing, or else they tend to really shrink away from it. And my belief and my experience with Chiron is that when you are willing to be vulnerable, you can really harness this great power, this great richness through transforming what you perceive to be your weakness into strengths, and then beyond that into medicine that brings healing into the world. I truly believe that wherever Chiron sits by sign and by its house is really something that we're here to learn and embody through our own healing and awareness and consciousness, and that we're meant to share that with the world. And I think that naturally happens when we do what I call the Chiron work. So Chiron also represents the medicine you make through engaging and feeling your weak spots. See, Chiron, in my experience, is less about intellectualizing things and more about being willing to feel things. So wherever Chiron, that woundedness sits within us or lives within us, sometimes the best starting place is just to feel it, just to accept that it's there and to truly feel it. And once we have the courage, we can slowly activate the very areas that we're most afraid or flawed, and those then become our strengths. So this is why, these reasons why I believe that Chiron is really worthwhile working with in the chart. For some people, their Chiron is of more significance, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But oftentimes I find that I could spend a whole session, maybe multiple sessions with someone just on Chiron. So to understand Chiron, we always go back to the mythology to think about, okay, how did this creature happen? And Chiron was born to Saturn, or Kronos, and to a nymph, Philyra. And it's interesting, legends always go different directions, and there's different variations and different versions, but legend says that Chiron was born a centaur, but that he wasn't even born exactly like a centaur, because he's oftentimes depicted with human front legs, which makes him even different from his own kind, which further reinforces this archetype of separation, being already he came out different. And truly, he came out different, and neither his father or mother wanted anything to do with him. In some respects, he was left on his own. There were some people that stepped in to help him, but he truly was, in some respects, abandoned and left to fend for himself. And it was through his own willingness to grow and to learn, through his own separation, then his own woundedness, that he came forward with many of the arts and sciences that we know today. Chiron is known for being a very powerful teacher and mentor to many of the great heroes of mythology. We hear the stories of Heracles and Jason and Achilles, and they're all tied back to Chiron, and Chiron being their wise teacher. And many times Chiron is referred to as the father of medicine. We oftentimes call Asclepius the father of medicine, who's also an herbalist and a surgeon, and the son of Apollo. But ultimately legend says that Chiron is the one who taught him in those ways. So the stories do vary, but ultimately it's one of Heracles or Hercules' poisoned arrows pierces Chiron's thigh. And legend says that that particular arrow had the Gorgon's blood on it, and the pain was almost unbearable. And there was nothing that they could really do, that Chiron could do. And he wanted to die, but it hurt so badly, but he was immortal, and so that wasn't an option. And ultimately, he reaches a point where he offers himself in exchange for freeing Prometheus, who at the time was being hung out every night for the eagle to eat out his liver, repeat, who was being imprisoned for bringing fire to humankind. So Chiron is in this place where he's tried to heal his own wound. He's developed all these deep wisdom in medicine and art and science and in teaching and sharing that, but he reaches a point where the suffering is great, and at the same time, he recognizes that he can free Prometheus in exchange for him freeing himself from his pain. So Chiron gave up his immortality and took essentially Prometheus's place, and then eventually they put Chiron, up as a constellation up in the sky, honoring him. And I think it's interesting that Prometheus was a champion of humankind. So, Prometheus was in all of his trouble because he gave fire to us. And so, in some ways, to me, that shows how Chiron, must have loved us. There was a love of humankind. And I think there's a reflection in that of how we can and do love ourselves once we're willing to kind of get under, I guess, some of the barriers that we set up around ourselves. And truly, it's almost, the story, if you think about this, that through woundedness then becomes an opportunity to relieve or free someone else, in some respects to heal their life, and then also to ease his pain. So it's this kind of never-ending cycle of this woundedness and the healing that runs together. So when we think about astronomy, I always go back and recheck the facts because I never remember exactly, so it's useful for me to spend time with that, because it's important that we know what's actually happening in the sky, what we're talking about. And Chiron was discovered in November 1st, 1977, and truly they're not entirely sure what it is. I think people say a comet sometimes, but I think the reason why we say that is because Chiron has a very eccentric orbit, and so as it gets closer to the sun, I think sometimes it starts to melt, which looks like a tail of a comet, and then it moves out again further out into the solar system. And Chiron takes 50 years to orbit the sun, so we will all experience a Chiron return, or have experienced the first Chiron return at right about the 50-year mark, which I think is also interesting. We will probably only have one, unless we live to be 100. And I think that's something to really pay attention to when that marker happens for people. And because of that strange orbit, Chiron ends up spending almost half of the entire time in the signs of Aries and Pisces. So those are the most common signs that we see. And it's interesting, we would talk about Chiron being a bridge between what we know and what we don't know. And it's interesting that the very orbit of Chiron is between Saturn and Uranus, and it actually comes just inside Saturn's orbit and then just outside Uranus's orbit. So people talk about it being the rainbow bridge or the connection between, but it truly does, as a body out there in space, move that way. So on our journey with Chiron, once we start to face this perceived woundedness or weakness, and when we start to prove to ourselves that we actually can heal and empower ourselves, in the seemingly broken areas, then we really can find this brand new confidence and positive attitude towards life. I think that Chiron is one of the examples where if we can turn that around and start living the medicine and even enjoying the medicine, it makes us feel like we can do anything. And we do it really by accessing what is already within us, which I think is also very powerful. So are you Chironic? For me, we look to aspects to Chiron. If there are a number of personal planets that are in aspect with Chiron, I think it's a pretty significant signature that Chiron is a part of the journey. So I always think of, in some ways, when things are an aspect to each other, like for example, if your sun was an aspect to Chiron, it's almost like the hero's journey is linked up with a wounded healer. So whatever the function is of the planet that's an aspect with Chiron, there's something about that wounded healer function that is working with that energy, or meant to work with that energy, that you chose to work with that energy. Also provenance of Chiron by placement. You know, if it's sitting right on the ascendant, if it's another, you know, important location, then that also speaks to the prominence of it. And I would say that the greater the influence of Chiron in the natal chart, the greater the impact of doing the work. And that's not to discourage anyone from digging into doing their Chiron work, because I think it's beneficial for everyone. But when you can see multiple signatures in the chart that show that the soul's intention in this lifetime was to evolve in part through really harnessing and getting intimate with Chiron and everything Chiron represents, and the personal embodiment of Chiron, then the work impact is huge. You know, it's almost like, you know, you sort of get in the groove and it moves in the right direction. So correlations with Chiron, I spoke about this just before, but the bridge between the known and the unknown, and between the personal and the transpersonal. So we think about that, and that's an important place between what we know and what we don't know. And that, in some respects, can be a scary place to be. So I think it makes sense, based on that this idea of separation makes sense, right? There is a feeling of separation between those two pieces, and what happens in the in-between, and how do we move back and forth between the two? And in some respects, Chiron is the part within us that helps us to come into more wholeness. And this whole idea of Chiron representing the archetype of separation. There are some people believe that the higher octave of the moon is Chiron. And there's differing opinions on this. So I don't necessarily say there's a one way, but this is one way. And it's one way that it works for me. Other ways can work for me as well. But in this particular, if you adopt this philosophy that Chiron is the higher octave to the moon, then we take the moon, which represents our separate identity, you know, our emotional self, and then Chiron, or think about the moon even is in some ways like our unconscious identity, you know, how it's our instinctual self, it's how we just sort of jump forward and lead off. I mean, the ascendant can be that some as well, but the moon is very instinctual. But Chiron is the conscious engagement with separation. So in some respects, this would be the moon being the emotional self, and the higher octave being true emotional maturity, the more whole ego sense of self, beyond just the separate identity, like embracing that and any woundedness around that, and then bringing a wholeness and a maturity to it. In the Tarot, the Hierophant is associated with Chiron, along with Taurus, and the Hierophant is specifically about spiritual learning and teaching. And it's interesting because the Hierophant is also, you know, associated with Taurus. So this idea of spiritual learning and teaching, at least through the Hierophant, is through and in physical form. You know, which is why the Hierophant is in very much linked up with the different rituals and routines and things that we do to experience spirit through our form. You know, it's not that we actually need to find spirit or find God, if that's your word you like to use. It's already there. It's the Hierophant types of activities that make us more open to receiving what is already there. But I like this idea of Chiron being associated with spiritual learning and teaching through and in physical form. You know, and in spirituality, really all it means is a focus on the human spirit. But with Chiron, it's the human spirit coming into the body, coming into the ego sense of self, which is different than, for example, perhaps a Jupiter or Neptune type experience. We think more of ourselves as expanding out, right, or leaving the body in some respects. This is more of an embodied version. So Chiron by sign. The signs in general represent how we evolve through consciousness. And each of the signs represents a domain of consciousness. So when I think about a sign, it's how we are evolving. And Chiron by sign shows us the nature of the wounding itself. It tells us about the belief that we have that's linked to this idea that we're broken and can't be fixed, and that there is no way to make that better. And we can call that the sacred wound. Chiron by house It's just that houses show where things are happening, right? So the sign, how we are evolving through consciousness, and the sign where things are happening. And there's a lot of overlap between the two. So in most of my slides, I'll talk about Aries of the first house, and like you might have Chiron in Aries or in the first house, and that can apply either place. So I'm not trying to delineate this too harshly. I'm just trying to give a little bit of an example of when I first look at Chiron, I look at the sign it's in for like the core wound, the nature of the wound, and I look at the house as the areas that are going to trigger the wound. But truly, how that manifests can feel very similar. So you can hold that very loosely. But if we go back to the idea that houses show where things are happening, the houses also show what we are doing with our evolution, right? So the signs, how we are evolving through consciousness, and the houses, what we are doing with our evolution through consciousness. The overlap is there, but there is a distinction, meaning that if I have the moon in Cancer and someone else has the moon in the fourth house, there will be similarities, but there also will be some differences. So Chiron by house, again, is the area of life oftentimes where our wound is triggered, where we experience it. And that means where we actually have the exposure to being healed. So if you choose the house your natal Chiron is in and you live there more, and by that I mean if your Chiron's in the 8th house and you choose 8th house type of experiences, 8th house or Scorpio, Plutonic types of people or places, then you're likely to trigger your own wound. And if that is what triggers it, oftentimes we've shied away from it, or we've developed some sort of an odd relationship with that. So this is like our choice to say, okay, I'm going to show up where the action can actually happen. It's a juicy place. And if you allow your wound to be exposed, keeping in mind that you might have kept it hidden for a really long time, and maybe even from yourself, especially if you've overcompensated. It's hard to come to terms. For example, I have Chiron and Aries in the first house. And I've always been very assertive in some ways. Very assertive, direct, sometimes loud, moving fast, trying to be strong, to use willpower to move through things. But truly my ability sometimes to initiate and to take action is very scary for me. But when I first learned about this and I dug into it more with myself, I recognized, that I did a really good job, a perfect job with myself of trying to prove that was not there. And that's what we can do, just as an example. And when Chiron comes around and contacts things in solar returns and transits, just more opportunities to break open and heal. Chiron is not the broken heart, it's the broken open heart. It opens something up so we can access it and we can heal it. And healing doesn't mean that we're not going to still experience the scar or feel some sensitivity, but it means that if it's healed up all crazy and crooked, just like a malunion with a fracture, that we might need to break it open to allow it to come together in more natural alignment, do the best that we can. So you can be watching whatever Chiron's doing and think, it's an opportunity to break open, to tap into my wounding. But what's with the wounding? Medicine. So if you don't want to use the wounding word, you can say, it's more opportunity for me to access my medicine. If that positivity makes a difference to you, which for some people it does. Words make a difference, how we say them, what they mean to us. So Chiron by house, and for me, this is the courage to cross the protection boundary. It's literally picking the arena where it's going to be uncomfortable. So it takes a lot of courage to do it, when you choose to do it, and choosing to put yourself into situations where you're going to feel that wound. And then it's a perfect opportunity to see, are your devices of protection breaking down? Are they breaking open? I think that that's a positive sign because it shows that you're willing to be vulnerable after you see what's in there. And how is it being exposed, or how is it being healed? What does it feel like when you face your internal weakness and you start to overcome it? It's powerful stuff. So these, there's several slides we'll go through with different examples just to get us thinking. And one thing I love about astrology is it doesn't matter if we're talking about Chiron. Aries in the first house will have similar signatures with all different kinds of planets and things. So, you know, if Chiron's not your main thing, you may find something else, you know, around Leo in the 5th house, for example, that reminds you of something. Because a signature, for example, of, you know, Uranus somewhere or Pluto somewhere, you know, difficult aspects somewhere can have similar feelings to them. So that kind of opens our playing field for how we can use this information or how we can apply it. But initially when I put it together, it was with my heart was with Chiron. So with Aries in the 1st house, the wound and the trigger zone have a lot to do with physical action. You know, Aries in the 1st house, ruled by Mars, has to do with our authentic desire and how we act upon getting what we want. It's the will to live. It's the life force. It's raw energy. And so all these issues around initiation, assertion, anger, primal desires, spontaneity, instinct, acting on your own behalf with independence. This is the zone with Aries in the 1st house with Chiron where the wounding and where the triggering happens. With Taurus in the 2nd house, we're now into the realm of self-sufficiency, supporting oneself, survival itself. You know, Chiron and Taurus can have deep woundings and fears around not surviving, you know, not having enough. And also Taurus in the 2nd house with its link to self-worth and self-love is also a big issue here. You know, I'm not deserving of love. So the ability to truly receive love and comfort can be stifled here. Although one usually really wants it. I mean, we all do. But, you know, with that particular wound, you know, it can be a really scary experience to feel like I'm actually not worthy of love and I can't do something about it. Right? I mean, once you get into that space and feel around in it and you start to build a different relationship with it, that changes everything. And literally just by you doing that changes the lives of everyone around you. You know, Chiron work, the proof is in the people's lives and how they're living. So Gemini in the 3rd house, this is now wounding in a trigger zone around communication. The ability to reason things out, to track things, has a lot to do with intelligence and knowledge, you know, knowing the answer, problem solving. And Gemini in the 3rd house also is associated with getting around the immediate environment. You know, getting where I need to go, making the right connections, catching the bus, getting off at this stop, going on the subway, getting there. And that's Gemini 3rd house stuff. And also learning and teaching. The 4th house in Cancer is home, family, sense of belonging, nurturing and caring of self, others, and also to be cared for. So, you know, these things can all permeate in different ways. But if nurturing and caring is part of the wound, you know, it can present in many ways. It can be that I don't feel someone's actually going to be able to take care of me. It can be I'm not going to be able to adequately take care of someone else. I'm not able to take care of myself. So, you know, you have to play and flesh these things out for yourself. But emotional security is a big deal. Trigger zone, the wound, right? I'm not emotionally okay. And nobody gets it. The 5th house in Leo, these are wounds and around creative self-expression. You know, a sense of pride, of shining in the world. Sometimes the 5th house can associate with, you know, father issues. But this is around being seen and being approved of and being loved. I mean, Leo more than anything wants to be loved, wants attention, wants praise. And this also can really impede the joy of playfulness. You know, Leo's very linked to the inner child, the inner solar child. Virgo in the 6th house, to be of service, perfection, self-control, and this is a huge one for Virgo, and especially the 6th house, control of the environment. You know, this woundedness, when it's in the 6th house, being unable to control one's environment can literally be crippling. Health, self-improvement, critical analysis also sits here. In the 7th, we move into relationships and partnerships. You know, the wound can be around I can't have an equal loving partnership. It's not going to happen for me. So then the choices we make might be, you know, partnerships that where people don't really show up or we don't really show up. Not really, not fully. not two Aries doing a dance, which is ultimately, what we want with Libra. So balance and equality and fairness, contracts, harmony, cooperation, all these things fall under that particular area. Scorpio in the 8th, power and powerlessness, control, emotional abandonment, betrayal, intimacy, vulnerability, transformation, death and rebirth, shared resources. The Scorpio 8th house wound is terribly afraid of emotional abandonment, of being betrayed, of being manipulated, of all the fixed signs have a scarcity issue associated with them. Taurus, there's not going to be enough stuff, not enough food, not enough resources. Leo, not enough love. Scorpio, not enough power. Aquarius doesn't fit the mold quite as well. I sometimes say with Aquarius, there's not enough liberation, not enough freedom. There's not enough room to be different, meaning I have to prove that I'm different because everyone can't be different. So, but the scarcity issue is a big one, because if I think there's not enough of something, I'm going to come up with strategies and habits to try to make sure that I get enough. Once we move to Sagittarius, we're now in the realm of beliefs, our personal truth, freedom to be who we are, the context of things, nature in general. Sagittarius is getting back down to the natural law and the natural self. The natural law that is within each of us. And we are all discovering that. But if the wound is in Sagittarius, we may believe that there's not something quite right there. The Sagittarius 9th house signatures oftentimes, and Jeffrey Wolf Green will talk about, can result in people having lived a lie because they've not been true to their nature. And so these signatures sometimes can unearth this is not natural for me. We start to feel that, which at first can be uncomfortable, but then can be very freeing. It's the freedom that Sagittarius wants. So also this woundedness can be around thinking bigger and broader, and the unknown itself. Capricorn in the 10th house, authority, responsibility, achievement, respect, public identity, career. It's the name we make for ourselves out there in the world, the image we put out there in the world, how we want to be respected in the world. Aquarius in the 11th house, this can be woundedness around not feeling like we belong anywhere. We can't find like-minded individuals, that we just are always feeling a little awkward on the outside. So the wound can be around friendships. It can be around progressive advancement itself, individuation, innovation, technology, all these things around how we really liberate ourselves, and then along with that, liberate everyone, for the good of the world. Aquarius in the 11th house is world-minded. It wants progression. But if our woundedness is around that somehow that we can't fully individuate, we can't liberate, we can't progress, we're not in touch with what the tribe really needs, and we can't find the tribe to begin with, then that can be a very sad and lonely place. Pisces in the 12th, these can be woundedness around imagination, around dreams and vision, and also divine consciousness and oneness. So whatever our faith is, if we have a faith in something greater, Pisces is that oneness. Also unconditional love, compassion, acceptance, and surrender. I think that a Chiron in Pisces, and to some extent the 12th house, has a lot to do with a wound around not feeling deserving or able to receive unconditional love. There's a block to that divine unconditional love that instills faith and hope and an acceptance of being okay with life as it is. So, Stephanie, let's unmute you, and before we go into the rest, let's have a break from left brain, and let's see if we can explore something a little more personal.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Do you want to, I can switch over to your chart, and why don't you, if you can remember your questions, if not, I can read them out loud. You tell me your preference.
Well, yeah, I think that I can't say them verbatim, but I kind of know in general what they're about. So
Yeah, because the one thing I can remind, you can see on the slide here, but you talked about that finding, sharing your spiritual self and personal beliefs in the public domain can feel uncomfortable for you. And you were wondering about that in career and how that can fit with the wound. So
Yeah.
let's jump, and of course, I mean, your Chiron's right on the midheaven. So, you know, everything you do publicly is going to, in some ways, trigger it. But what I think is especially powerful about that placement is that's actually who you are out there in the world. Like, in some respects, I mean, publicly you can be the wounded healer, meaning that's a huge amount of medicine to carry forward. Chiron in Gemini sometimes can feel like it's not able to share its information. You know, that wound in Gemini can feel frustrated with not being able or not feeling confident to explain or say or make sense of things. But I think in this context that there's a huge potential for that to be healing for all those around you, even if it wasn't perfect words every time.
Yeah.
But how does it feel for you? I mean, we haven't even talked about all the stuff going down at the bottom of your chart that's playing with it. So
no kidding. Yeah, no kidding. Well, it's just like super synchronistic that we're talking about this right now, because I feel like this is precisely the work that I'm doing at the moment, that I'm aware that I haven't actually put much of an identity out into the world. I've been very like, go with the flow, whatever makes others happy, because there's this super deep fear that if I declare who I am, that I won't be accepted. And so there's kind of this, you know, like, I'll just, whatever makes the group happy type of feeling for me. And what's been coming up lately is that I want to say something. I feel as though I have something to share. And I'm afraid that this kind of inspirational train of thought might just stop as soon as I put it out there.
What if it did?
What if it did? Well, so I've been talking to people about that, and they say, well, what if it does? Then you can share that it stopped for you, and you could just be authentic and like, oh, I don't have anything to write about today.
Yeah, and the rest of us say, thank goodness, like we all feel like we're supposed to all the time, right? There's something here's what I think, like, sharing that moment, if that happened, and first of all, we don't even know if that would happen. Like, it might be you would start and you'd be so in the flow, it would be absolutely beautiful. You know, we don't know. But just the fact that you're open to it, like, that would be embodying the wound and sharing it. And that's what I meant by and that in itself, for anybody who is actually paying attention, like, they will feel that.
Yeah.
But I think the next part of your question, how might I expect Saturn, Uranus, and the Sun opposite to play out relating to my fourth house of home? I think about opposition, the opposition is about bringing awareness to something. And when we get awareness of it, we tend to see it as something happening on an opposite side, right? So oppositions can feel like a tug of war, meaning I can have this or I can have that. You know, the fourth house is private. You know, the fourth house in general doesn't necessarily want to go out there and share a bunch of private things with people. It's not what it naturally wants to do. You know, and you also have the Saturn in the fourth house right down there. And Saturn can make one, Saturn is not an easy place at the bottom of the chart, because it takes the emotional nature that naturally wants to flow, and Saturn puts fear there. Saturn puts weird responsibility around it. Saturn can really symbolize, in some ways, to my mind, it makes the emotions somewhat rigid. And I don't mean that in the way that you necessarily project them outward, but inside, like, it stops them. It's like it sets boundaries around it. So I think that in some ways, all that little stuff in opposition, you know, they truly work together. And anytime we're working in an opposition, I mean, we want to integrate the two. And I don't know, the Sun especially stands out to me. Not that the other ones are not important, but I'm considering the Sun in that opposition as well, because it's tight enough for me and it's in that little cluster down there.
Mm-hmm.
But Sun opposed Chiron, I was just talking about earlier, when the Sun makes a contact with Chiron, that is literally, that planet is your ally on your journey. So when I've taught classes before, I say, if you've got planets conjunct the Sun, imagine yourself linking arms with them because they're with you on your hero's journey. And for you, you have that. You have the Chiron opposed Sun. So the Sun in Capricorn in the 4th house, which can be a very controlled, wanting to stay safe, wanting things to be okay, wanting to have security. And it makes sense because Uranus down there in the 4th house can be disruptive. So there are probably past signatures of trauma, around those areas as well. But the challenge with that is how do you take this wounded healer concept and allow it to integrate with it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think what's been coming up for me just so much in the last 2 weeks is that I really need to walk the talk. And what that means for me is like to get in touch with my inner emotional self, which clearly in my chart, like there's a lot there. And then to express that like vulnerably on a public platform as the true experience in this, like we all experience that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really been what's been coming up for me lately.
I think that a big part of medicine for you and for all those around you comes through doing exactly that. And to me, this signature, it's not about getting it perfect. There's nothing to do about that. It's not about doing something a certain way. It's simply sharing it.
Right. As much as I really want to be perfect.
Yeah. South Node and Virgo. Of course you do.
I know that doesn't benefit it's just not realistic.
Well, it also doesn't support, Shelly and I were talking earlier today, and we're going to look at her chart, and we were talking about this earlier, like none of us, at least no one I know, who's really on the journey of like uncovering and digging into parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable and wounded and sitting with things and having our floor become the ceiling and ceiling become the floor. Like we don't want someone with a perfect example. We want someone who can feel what it feels like to be in the mess, because that's how we come alongside somebody. Yeah. And so all this stuff, Saturn ultimately rules mastery. Uranus is where you can break free and liberate. Neptune being where you can dissolve false illusions and come into more and more realizations of truth and greater wholeness. All those things sitting down there in the 4th house, all around your psychological, emotional foundations of who you are. Like you have the ability to really like define that for yourself and to know it, like intimately know it, to explore it, to decide what it is for you. But that 4th house is, any of the water houses, like they don't necessarily string well together into thought. So if you can remember that when you go out there with your Chiron in Gemini, that's a retrograde up there at the midheaven, you're taking something that already doesn't translate very well into words. And just knowing that itself and just sharing that with people as, we do the best we can to talk about a language of images and feelings, right? But words themselves are never going to be, at least in my opinion, the words can never perfectly describe that realm. Yeah. But that's one main tool we have for doing the best that we can around it.
Right. Like I'm going to do my best at it.
Yeah, that's all we can do. And I tell you that Chiron and Gemini, it's really likely, it will likely trigger, these, meaning when you put yourself in situations to share, to talk, to communicate, to speak, to publicly speak, whatever that looks like, likely that will trigger it. It will trigger it, right? It will trigger it and trigger it and trigger it. But what does that mean? That means you're in it.
Just the thought of doing it is being triggered. And so I'm like, okay, that means I need to go towards it. Because if there's fear there, I can know that the growth will come by moving into it.
Exactly. And for me, that's going slowly, it's like bite-sized pieces of stuff, we don't have to just choose to go to a full stadium, for the first time we do it or something. It's like little things. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, but no, I think I think that's powerful. And with the sun, I think about back to how you have the opposition with the sun, you have, with Uranus. And so here's the thing, all that stuff sitting on the sun, in my mind, especially those Saturn and Uranus on the sun, they're what they're trying to do is to strengthen and liberate your sense of, your sense of purpose. Like the sun is how you shine, it's your individual light, your brilliance, your consciousness. And so as they do that, as that's happening, I think Chiron's on the other side saying, and look over here, and look over here, there's even more. Because I think as you do that fourth house work and then you extend out and incorporate that Chiron in the 10th house, I think that's when really a lot of that magic happens. And I don't think, by the way, that just like with you sharing, there's also something about you doing that that's going to give you some of the pieces you need. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, yes, it's a huge gift and it's a huge, you being able to speak or write, whatever that looks like, with Gemini up there on the midheaven, that's, I think, is important. But the ruler of that is in the fourth house, so it comes from an emotional place. But what my point is that that's a gift, but also it's a gift you're giving yourself, because when you put yourself in that arena, I think that's how you'll get more and more intimate with that stuff. And that's how you'll build that strength on the inside. To me, that's a big part of that fourth house. It's like, I'm no longer, like, the undercurrents beneath me are not, riding me around anymore. Like, I'm actually in them down enough where I can actually just kind of move this way,
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about, surfing or being in the ocean, that kind of, to me, is how it feels.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, Stephanie, before we move on?
No, I think that was really what I was feeling, and just super spot on, and came at a great time and very informative. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you for sharing your personal stuff.
Oh, yeah, I love to do that. Thank you.
Okay. So these, and I think what I'll do, I know Linda says we have a little extra time, but everyone might not want to stay particularly late, and you can all access this later and have all the slides. So I think we'll go through these little, I won't spend too much time. You can go back and use them if you want with your own work if they help you. And let's get into the other charts. I'm not going to skip completely, but I'm not going to spend the time that I normally would. It's funny, like, I've spent a whole afternoon workshops on Chiron. It's just, truly, to do it well, it just takes time. So when you're doing your own work, give yourself the time. But today, I think we'll get into some guts of stuff is good. Experiences and real people helps me learn. I think it helps others as well. But here's some things I was thinking about. Wound management strategies. Because I think, okay, how am I going to recognize this wound? And in others, if you're seeing clients, if you're teaching in yourself, whatever work you're doing around Chiron. So what might you look for? Wound management strategy. So Aries in the first house. And these are just ideas. So there's a million more you could come up with. There can be a fear of actively engaging life and of life itself. And that can be afraid of things that move externally and also your own physical happening. Because Aries in the first house has a lot to do with the body. So Aries sometimes has a tendency to move really fast to get out of danger. So one of its compensatory plans is, I will run so fast I can't fall in the hole. And I had a teacher once tell me, I have Aries rising, and that was the thing. And I was having a session and they said, you're already in the hole. And that's kind of the realization we can have when we realize if, for example, this is a signature of yours and you have been moving fast to avoid something, it's not really avoidance. It's just the perception of if I move fast enough. So with Aries, it can be, forcing life, forcing hard in certain areas, or simply avoiding altogether. In this case, we bring in the adrenaline thing. So it's the fight, flight, or freeze. But one thing people forget about Aries is that the freeze is just as likely as the fighting and fleeing. So pay attention to that if you have it. And you might not even realize that you are freezing. So one thing with Aries that I always recommend is people to choose a lot less. If you're having a hard time initiating and choosing and taking action, then pick smaller things but be able to actually do something with them so you can start to build confidence in your ability to do that. Taurus, there can be a fear of receiving life. And so resources and love and worth all come into this with Taurus. And the compensatory plan can be extreme self-sufficiency or avoiding situations that could incite any drama or get messy. You know that Taurus doesn't like complication, doesn't want to get dragged down into something, and it doesn't want to rely on somebody else. And if it's already afraid that it can't receive, you know, it may not do anything that would ever require dependency on somebody else and keep itself in survival mode. And you can see there's some examples for possible remedies. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time here. But Gemini in the third house can be afraid of making sense or not being able to make sense. And you can read that into all of these. You know, I didn't bring out every edge of it, but ultimately this is the idea of afraid of making sense of life, which ties in knowledge and communication. So what's a great way to overcompensate? Know it all. Have all the answers and be able to pull it right out anytime somebody asks. And sometimes also Gemini or third house can use fancy words. They may use fancy talk to distract from the fact that they don't really know something or they don't really understand it, because at the heart of the Gemini wound oftentimes is I can't figure it out. But I don't want anyone to know that, including myself. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to sound like I'm smart, right? Gemini has real attachments to worries of being seen as ignorant or stupid. You know, sometimes people with Chiron in Gemini, and the same with other, you know, Saturn in Gemini or third house, a lot of these more difficult signatures. Sometimes people had difficulties in school. They may have been dyslexic or they have a hard time putting words together. So that can be a reality, not for everyone, but it all kind of comes down to the same idea, right? I can't communicate or think the way other people do, but I think I'm supposed to. Probably the best remedy is just learning to say I don't know and be okay with it. But that takes a lot of effort and a lot of commitment when we're programmed that we're supposed to know. So the fourth house in Cancer, it's afraid of getting what you need from life or not being able to get what you need from life. And so this brings in all kinds of dependency and belonging issues. So sometimes these individuals can either not want anything to do with family or closeness because they don't believe they can have it, or else they overly care for people, or they may hyper focus, you know, on creating that dynamic. And same with the emotional nature. They could be overly dramatic with the emotions or withholding with emotions. But regardless, there's something to do with that very, you know, Cancer in the fourth house has a very immature element to it. And so if there's something wounded about being able to get what I need, then sometimes we won't share our needs. Mm-hmm. Fifth house, afraid of life receiving you. So now we have a whole different expression, right? So when I'm genuinely shining, love, self-expression, the stage, your cheering section, these are all areas of woundedness around Leo in the fifth house. And so sometimes what happens, because Leo loves to put on a show, and Leo wants to put on the show, it's going to get the feedback that makes Leo feel loved and appreciated. So a great compensatory plan is I put on the best show I think everyone else wants to see, and then I'll never have to be embarrassed, you know? And so sometimes that means we don't put our true self out there. And the other side of Leo in the fifth house is sometimes they never put themselves out there at all. You know, Leo gets a bad reputation for, you know, being a show off and center of attention, but there's another kind of Leo, and that's the kind that never puts itself in the center because it's terribly afraid of being embarrassed. And so it sits on the sideline. Virgo in the sixth house, it's afraid of getting life right. So these are issues around service and perfection, can be health and healing, self-improvement. And oftentimes the compensatory plan, and you know this is true with Pluto in the sixth, Saturn in the sixth, lots of planets in the sixth, is I'll just control the environment. You know, if I control the environment, everything will be okay. And we all know how well that works when we really put, you know, our faith into that being our safety net. Sometimes as well, Virgo in the sixth house can just give up. If I can't get it perfect, I won't do it at all. So you get hyper-focused, people that are, you know, very critical, trying to get every detail right because they don't want you to know, they're afraid that they'll make a mistake, or the people who say, forget it, I'll never get it right. And then you know what? That's a perfect plan because no one will ever find out that it wasn't perfect if you don't try. So there's those two sides. The 7th, afraid of relating with life. So now we have all the fears and wounds around relationships and partnerships. Marriage is a good example here. Compromise, cooperation. And so the compensation can be either to face life alone, forever avoiding conflict, or sometimes holding on to an ideal partner over a real one. You know, Libra likes to idealize, and so there can be an attachment to, here's what that perfect partner would be, and then a big disconnect between what's actually really happening in life. There also can be a lot of codependency with this particular signature, so over-compromising or over-adapting to keep a partner or to keep a relationship, because the fear is underneath that I'll lose it or I can't have it, so I have to, you know, do something to ensure that that doesn't happen. The 8th house, afraid of life that you can't control. And this is where sex and death and transformation and power and all the things that push us to the edge sit. So if the wounded nature of ourselves sits in this area, we might avoid vulnerability at all costs. We might choose to never let ourselves be penetrated. You know, these are true of lots of Scorpio and 8th house signatures. Or we might go to the other side and live in complete overwhelm. You know, which is the other piece, which is, you know, we may just always try to live off of someone else's source of power, some other person, some other group, some other belief system, something, because we don't believe it. We don't believe in our own empowerment. We somehow believe that our own power source somehow is not enough. The 9th house, afraid of the meaning of life. Found outside the known. So these, again, beliefs, truth, the big picture. And you know, if this is where our wound lies, we might just stay home. You know, in other words, we might just say, hey, you know, I'm afraid about that environment that is new to me. I'm afraid to go explore what I don't know. I'm maybe even deeper, I think underneath this one is, I'm afraid that I might expose my current life as untrue to who I am, and everything will have to change. You know, but those are fears we probably aren't necessarily conscious of. So we might stay home, and we might just keep with the beliefs that we were taught growing up or the society has shared with us. But, you know, on the other side, we could be ever seeking, you know, going and going and going and going and always seeking a truth, but never finding the one that's true to you. And these are kind of the wound signatures of that 9th house in Sag. Capricorn in the 10th, this is a fear of taking responsibility for your life. And ultimately it comes down to, I won't be able to do it well enough. I won't be respected. I won't be able to achieve my goals. I won't be able to follow through, you know, all those Capricorn things. So public image, career, contributing to society, all these pieces fall in here. So in compensation, it's very common for these individuals to live in such a way that they don't have to live up to expectations, specifically their own, because deep inside they'll know they have them. And they'll feel shame around that. But if they actually tried, if they see, the thing is, if you believe that you really can't do something, or you really believe that you are broken in such a way that you can't operate, then there is like a tendency to say, well, then why would I set myself up for that situation? And this is an example, you know, perhaps the repeating theme is, you know, I can't be successful. I can't make my way in the world. I won't be respected. Or it could be the other side. You can be so driven that all you do is spend your whole life on your career, but maybe it's not the thing you really want to do, which I think is a big question around that 10th house in Capricorn. 11th house, afraid of progression and individuation in life. If you have Chiron in the 11th house or in Aquarius, you may be afraid to break off and be your own individual liberated self. You know, the 11th house, it's also tribe and groups and all these things, but I think like at the root of that fear, there is a fear of, you know, individuation itself is letting go of the known and moving out into some new territory where you know, like you set yourself free. You break free from all those structures in your mind, you know, in your life, all those things. But the idea of individuation now puts a focus on you and you doing your own thing. So the 11th house in Aquarius can have wounds around feeling like I'm not going to be able to progress in life. I can't really liberate myself. And then the other things we talked about before, you know, as far as belonging in groups and all those kinds of things. So in compensation, you might emphasize how you are different. You know, you might just say, well, you know, I'm weird or I'm strange. And some people actually, you know, live off the grid. They just step outside of society and I don't fit, I'm stepping out. Or they might stay within, but always kind of be on the outside looking in. You know, it's like even when you're in a group or at a party, you know how it feels. Most of us do when we're not really there. You know, it's like we're observing, but we don't really feel like we're part of it. So on the other side, sometimes this wound can result in just staying with the status quo and never breaking out and being yourself. Because some of those wounds around the 11th house in Aquarius is the fear of just being me. Being me outside of all the things that I've known myself to be and the identity I've created and what everyone expects of me and me in a partnership and me in a job and me this, like it's like the liberation of just me. And then we get to Pisces in the 12th house, and that can be a fear of life dissolving into nothing. You know, there can be a fear of a nothingness, of nothing meaning anything, of meaninglessness. You know, of also this, you know, fear we talked about earlier about unconditional love. So all these things with compassion, suffering, you know, illusions, dreams, vision, they all fall into this bucket. So some people can actually choose to believe in nothing. And if I don't believe in anything, then I'm not excluded from the love of it. You know, and that's one way to solve that problem. I believe in nothing. Because at the heart of it, if I do believe in something, but then my belief is that I'm not really a part of it, or somehow I'm not included, or I'm not intimately within the grace of whatever that energy is. And remember, the wound is what we think can't be fixed. Then a very easy solution would be that I'm not going to believe in that thing that I could be excluded from. Or the other side could be a very blind faith, you know, which can be almost a helpless situation of, well, you know, the Pisces 12th house can be signatures of the victim of me just waiting for someone to save me. All right. This you can look at later if you want. This helped me because it's a list of questions around each particular sign and each particular house. And so you can pick yours, both, because if you have, unless they're the same, like mine's an Aries in the first house, so it's the same box, but for you it's probably going to be two. And you can kind of put those together and look at that and see. So for example, you know, we're going to talk about Shelly in a second, and she has Chiron and Pisces in the 11th house. So I'd look at both those boxes. You know, and those are the kind of questions I'd be asking. So once we get through getting into our wound, being with it, then we become the embodiment of sacred medicine wisdom. And we know when that's happened, when our defensiveness is no longer triggered in that area. Meaning, if your Chiron is in Gemini and you worry about saying the wrong thing or not communicating clearly, and if that situation comes up and all of a sudden you recognize, wow, that really doesn't have the same charge it did anymore. You know, you may still feel a little bit of something, but you won't feel a need to self-protect or to hide. Then that's when you know, right, the medicine's really happening. And then you're able to support others. It's like you literally cross the boundary of the material world into new awareness, which to me is all about that Chiron bridging, you know, the known and the unknown. What we know is that we have a story about a wound. What we don't know is what it really means and whether it's really a wound at all and what we might do with it. Okay. Shelly, why don't you unmute yourself?
Okay.
So these were your questions, and we can talk about them. You wanted to know if Chiron's influence is particularly exaggerated with you. And what's interesting is, well, yes, because you're in your Chiron return. So, you know, and this is something that, you know, for the rest of you, Shelly didn't know that she was in her Chiron return when she kind of randomly saw my post. I was like, oh, I think I'll participate, you know, and maybe I'll volunteer my chart. So, you know, as we were looking and talking earlier today, as I realized that, you know, she is at that age and she's in the Chiron return. And so that's a really pronounced time that, you know, like I said, it's the only time, unless we live to 100, that we're going to have that exact same trigger, right? It's never going to happen again. So Chiron's coming right on top of that woundedness, and it's almost like it wants to emphasize it enough so that you know it's there, so that you'll feel it, and so that you can really start to make use of what's in it. I believe it's that part of us that, like, on some deep level knows all the potential that's there and knows the capacity of that to be shared and used out there in the world. And so it's like our reminder of what it is. And so for anybody, when transits happen, they have a lot to, how we respond with them and work with them has a lot to do with how we've been living our lives and how conscious we are and what work we've already been doing. So for some people, things feel like it's blindsided, and it's just because we haven't been aware. But for people that are aware, it's a different experience. I think that for Shelly, it's making it present enough for her that she finds a workshop, to get involved in and put her chart out there, which in my mind is very intuitive, and it means, she knows where it's at. Shelly, what would you say about how you're actually feeling right now with that Chiron return?
Been going through a lot of very difficult things in my life. Went through a divorce, and just a lot of soul searching as to, why and what happened, and trying not to be a victim about it, but more, what can I do? What can I change in myself to make sure that I find relationships that are good for me and inspiring and supportive and all that. And it's been a tough journey to have to look inward like that, and not something that I easily do. I've struggled with codependency, and looking at the different aspects of my chart, it makes sense because of just what we were talking about the 11th house, and also elements of my chart being, I'm more concerned about other people and not concerned about me. And so with this time in my life, I need to be concerned about me, and it's very uncomfortable for me to do that. So I've got to break through that and figure out a balance of other people and me, instead of it always being about my interaction with other people, if that makes sense. But it's been a tough year of transitions for me, in good ways and bad. But I feel like this is really helping me to understand who I am, what I want, what am I looking for, what have I stopped myself from achieving, and what should I be doing that would help me feel more fulfilled, personally, professionally, like that. So this is very helpful.
I think the Chiron return, and I've had, the people in my life that have gone through it, people that I've worked with it, like oftentimes it is a time of, people feel like, whoa, it brings up a lot of emotional stuff, that's what it does, but ultimately it wants you to feel. That's what I think the reminder is, like, it's the part of you that wants to feel, and so, but that can be very uncomfortable initially, especially, Chiron and Pisces, because if we tie this up with issues around unconditional love and our capacity to experience it or have it, and when we have that there, there's, I think Chiron and Pisces in general there can be a feeling of hopelessness, and a feeling of being lost. Oftentimes, like, Pisces in general can feel lost or confused around things. And if we've spent a big part of our lives pushing that away and focusing on other people, which is a great strategy to avoid it, it just means that we come right back to, like, in my mind, like, Chiron comes back around and it triggers and it says, no, this is still there.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, for you, like, I know we've talked about the sign and the house, it seems to me that with the 11th house, and just knowing what I know about your chart as well, that 11th house, like that trigger, it's almost like when I think about 11th house this way, it's, I'm going to break free and be me no matter what anyone else thinks. The 11th house, there's this level of objectivity of simply, I'm just going to be me and I don't care. And this is not all the time, because the 11th house also likes groups and tribes, but there's an element of that. And I think that for you with all the partnership and with the South Node and Scorpio and all that, that's in some ways, that's the opposite of individuating. That's wanting to merge into something. You know, and so I think what's interesting about this, I think in some ways you've, like that merging, you've tried to do it through someone else, but I think that Chiron in Pisces 11th house is about to fully merge with yourself. You know,
and I have denied myself of that. I mean, my whole life has never been about me. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. Everything was chaotic in my household. I was supposed to take care of all my younger siblings. Never really felt like any of that was about me or that there was any attention on me. And then, you know, got married right out of high school, had kids right away. And, you know, I've just gotten to the point in the last couple of years, this is the first time in my adult life that I haven't had young children and then now I've been single for the last 2 years. It's the first time I lived alone in my entire life. I have never lived alone until just now, like in the last year. And it's been weird because I'll sit there and I don't even know what to think or, you know, what I want if it's just up to me. And I've never had this kind of freedom where I really can do whatever I want to do. Like I'm not at the mercy of doing anything for my kids anymore or for a husband or anybody. And sometimes I don't even know what that means. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want to do. So it's exciting, but it's also terrifying.
Do you think too, like, I think also Chiron in Pisces can also be a woundedness around vision. Like sometimes it can be an inability like to see or to have that complete vision too. And so I think these are all things at the return. I mean, not that you couldn't do them at any time, but especially at the return, like it's in my mind, they get repealed back. You know, it's like, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? And so it can be a time for, I think what's difficult about it is that anytime we're working with our vision and with Pisces in general, you know, Pisces rules illusion and disillusion. And so the idea of Neptune and Pisces is that we go through disillusionment to come into more truth, but it's painful. No, it's painful. So like, it's painful to have the layers strip back, and we have to sometimes go through a period of time where it's fuzzy. You know, we don't really know what we don't know what it's going to be or what we're going to do with it. And when the previous strategy has been always look to someone else, kind of to determine what that will be, you know, and this all speaks to, and the rest of you guys can see it, but it all speaks to all this. I mean, Taurus and North Node and all this stuff clustered up in the 12th house. You know, this whole chart speaks to coming into self-sufficiency, to coming into self-acceptance, into receiving unconditional love, and to doing it in a much more simple, uncomplicated way. But I think ultimately the woundedness, like, it wants you to feel enough so that you can get reconnect with all the support that you do have. And Pisces is the support that is like not necessarily just what you see, but it's the support everywhere. It's whether you believe in your angels or your guides or the universe, like it is that you are fully supported.
And I felt like I haven't belonged, like you were saying about the 11th house, and just feeling like there's something different about me, I don't fit in, all that, which is, I have to be okay with that. Like, it doesn't matter, and still try to make my own way and have that be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy to do that. And the other thing that really throws me off big time is when I don't have a plan, I'm always thinking to the future. And it's really hard for me to be present. And I've had to really practice mindfulness and meditation and things like that to really help myself to be in the moment and to stay in the moment and stop so much forward thinking, because then I lose experiencing the present because I'm always thinking about the future. And that's been something that I've been really working hard on the last year, is trying to figure out how to do that and be okay with that. It's okay not to be always thinking about the future. I need to learn to enjoy my life right now.
And that Chiron and Pisces, like, part of that wound can be not being able to accept that things are okay. You know, like there really can be, I mean, it's like, it sounds like a simple thing, but it's a deep, fundamental, you know, wound of that things are not okay as they are. And when we really believe that, I mean, that's, sometimes it's hard to keep going, you know, if that's what the belief is. But ultimately, you know, when we get into that spot, and to me, like, this is like when you put yourself in those situations, for example, where you say, you know, I'm going to be me, and even if it's uncomfortable, you know, I'm not going to defer to so and so, or you make whatever choices that you do to like be in that 11th house realm or to open up that Pisces stuff more, then you start to realize and you start to develop a real faith, you know, and real compassion, like true compassion that comes from, you know, from that experience of it.
Yeah.
So what other questions do you have before we move on to Cameron about that Chiron?
You've kind of, I mean, I wrote down some other extensions, but I think you've touched on all of them. You answered every question I had. Yeah. But this has been very, very helpful for me, just learning more about this and how to make this be the positive transformation in my life, so that from this point forward, it's going to be better.
Yeah, and I think about like transiting planets, like with a Chiron, it's just like a knock on the door, you know, and depending on our life situation, you know, how loud or whether the door falls in or whatever, you know, whatever it is. But you and I talked about this before, but I do believe that, you know, this faith, which is associated with Pisces, in my mind, that faith, when we really come to that place of reestablishing faith, and when we start to have that love for ourselves as we are, you know, unconditionally, we don't have to like it. Like I was like, I don't have to like it, I just have to love it. You know, there's a difference to me. And I remind myself that almost every single day, I don't have to like a lot of things, but I need to love them. And when we start to kind of feel the difference between that, it's very powerful. And then we begin to allow, and then we begin to allow people in our lives that way. You know, no one says we have to like everything, but oftentimes we're programmed in such a way that we think that we're supposed to feel that we like something. And then we equate that liking, you know, with love. In my mind, they're very different concepts. And, you know, in some respects, we're talking about more of a Venus level, but the Pisces Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. So when we're dealing with personal love and self-love, automatically the next octave is the unconditional love. You know? But I think that once we sort of move that, I need to like it, it needs to be a certain way, that has nothing to do with it. We just think that it does. So my point was, when I started speaking there, was I was going to say, once you're really in that space where you start to like feel that, that's a super powerful thing to share with people in your life. You know, yeah, but you will, because you already do. You know, you do by being in this workshop, you do by whatever it is in your life. But I'm just saying it will become even stronger. And for a lot of people, you know, faith is a weird thing. How do we define it? What does it even mean to us? But that's the kind of thing where when you find your way, like your way doesn't have to be my way, but when I can see that you were able to come to a place within yourself that you could actually put your weight down and be, I'm okay, and things are okay, even while you're improving, because whatever, like, you know, that's that thing you talked about before, about being present in the moment. It's like being able to be present, being able to be your own unique self, being able to individuate, and at the same time have everything be okay just as it is. That's really what that's about, having experiences of that. And that's what I think the Chiron part of you and the return, that's what it wants to offer you. That's what you want to offer yourself. You can be different and completely belong.
Yeah, I say yes, but I mean, I haven't believed that, but you're right. I need to believe that. And accept myself and accept what is, and be present in that moment, be accepting and love it. And it's not easy.
Yeah, and I would think even before like the jump of I need to do it, just hold space that it's possible. Like that's a really positive way of working with that energy. It's saying you don't have to know that it's going to be something or happen a certain way. Just hold space that it's possible. Even if you're not there yet. And I think hanging out with yourself where you're at, that's a big part of Chiron. Chiron is not about coming up with a quick fix solution for something. It's about you be with a part that feels broken long enough that that part so deeply and so wide that there's nothing hiding from yourself anymore. And then you'll be able to make new decisions because your relationship with what you once called, wounded or broken parts or whatever our terminology is, like the relationship will be different. And even if you never change that, like even if your patterns never change, and even if you never came to a place where you said, wow, I can really feel like I can be myself and I still belong, even if you never got there, it would still be different. Your life would still be different because that space of being in that, instead of like avoiding it or pushing it into some direction, like you'll be in that space.
Okay.
And even that space itself can be healing to other people. One thing about this Chiron, it's about, like I said, it's about embodiment. So embodying the wound. I don't think the medicine comes until we embody the wound. And I think all of us these days are really quick to move from the woundedness suddenly to I want to be in the medicine. And that's before we maybe only just uncovered, wow, I'm understanding a little bit about my wound. And then we instantly want to say, now I need to do this and I want to do that. And what I say is, then be with the wound, because for a long time, most of us with our Chiron wound, we did everything to avoid it or to overcompensate for it, whatever our pattern's been. So there's so much potential in saying, I'm going to be with it and not putting expectations on it, but I'm going to be with it. Meaning I have room for it. I make room for it. And even if that means saying, like, for me, oftentimes I just have to, I re-say to myself, I'm in that space I really know. But I have a couple of choices, right? I can say, I'm really uncomfortable here, so I'm going to do something or make a choice or do something to make myself forget about it or think it's not such a problem. Or one of my favorites, I love to pretend I'm making progress because I have a new mental solution. This is my South Node Gemini stuff. But I think, I have a great solution for it, but I'm not living that solution at all. So the Chiron part of us is not interested in a solution that we can't live. It's interested in living with what and who we are and then seeing how that transforms and evolves. So that's why I encourage people, and I try with myself to say, not to be so quick to say, here's what I need to do. It's more of a getting honest with, here's really where I'm at. And then it's like being in there, you have 5 new doors open. But you're going to pick if you want to go through a door.
Okay.
It's just like Stephanie with her, she may never decide that she wants to get up there and really fully share to her full capacity to be a teacher or a speaker or a writer or whatever that capacity. She may never choose to fully do that. That's her choice. But when she sits in those moments and really feels where she's at, and there's like an authentic choice of, I feel the wound and I'm not going to go into the zone to open it up more, that's really honest. And when we're really honest with ourselves, I think so much becomes available. We become available to ourselves. Does that make sense? Like there's something about to me, self-honesty is like a big part of self-love.
Yeah. And not being delusion. And I've deluded myself with the Pisces to think that things are they're not really what I thought they were.
Yeah. Well, that's a Pisces. Pisces loves to do that. And in many ways, Pisces is able to, make so many beautiful things on this planet, But what we're dealing with now, in the Chiron realm, is we're dealing with how we can really live. And there can be a disconnect, particularly with Pisces, between my fantasy and my idealism and what could be and the possibility and what I can actually live with. And when it comes to partnerships, what I wish my partner would be, the potential of what someone could be. Oh, Pisces loves the potential. And so this is why with Chiron work, oftentimes we have to really slow down and choose a lot less. We have to say, wow, my ability to be present with myself, emotionally present with myself, with all my shit, you know, it takes patience. But when you do it, I mean, talk about intimacy.
Yeah, and even though that's what I want, it still scares me. So
you know you're in the right realm, right? I mean, that's what I say.
Wow.
Because if there wasn't, you know, and fear is just suppressed excitement. Fear is suppressed excitement. Fear is suppressing the excitement of life. And so fear and excitement are always going hand in hand. So if you can sit in fear long enough, it will turn to excitement. They're like intertwined buddies. But most of us don't want to sit in something long enough to get any blessing from it. We say, oh, this is terrible. You know, I'm terrified, or I'm not going to be able to make it here, or this is uncomfortable. And so we go somewhere else. We don't wait.
It's just like the advice I gave someone earlier today, who I had lost a lot of weight, and she was asking me how. And I had said, you know, I went to boot camp and had to stick it through, because for the first 4 weeks I saw no results, and being able to stick with it for that time, when I finally did see the results, was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because it was so it sucks the life out of you to work that hard and not see anything from it. And because I stuck it out for those 4 weeks, then the weight started to just melt off, and I ended up losing 85 pounds. But if I would have quit in that first month thinking that I wasn't making progress, I would have never been able to succeed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So one last thing before we move on to Cameron is an extremely patient. So Pisces also rules joy. You know, so the woundedness can be a belief that I'm never going to experience joy. Like, joy is not in my birthright. And so choosing little things day by day that are joyful can remind you in the faith of joy existing, you know?
That's good advice.
Okay.
Very good advice.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Okay, Cameron, are you unmuted? I know we've made you wait forever.
Oh, no, it's fine.
So where do you want to start?
I know I asked you a few questions, but I mean, whatever you feel from the chart, because that's how I predominantly do it. I just feel, and then I just go in with resonates with me. So I would say do that.
Okay. Well, one thing was interesting, because I don't actually do, like, the fixed stars, like, I've only dabbled with them a little bit, so I don't work with them a lot. So it was interesting to me that you asked me the question about Chiron conjunct Sirius. So it made me sit with that a little bit. And I thought, you know, as I was thinking about that, I started to look it up a little bit. And I thought, well, if Sirius is the brightest star in the sky, if it's like the thing that's seen the most, and you have that sitting right by your Chiron, that in itself, without us even making it too complicated, tells us something, right? Like, it's meant to be seen. And it's in the seventh house. So whatever you do with that, in my mind, it's meant to be shared with other people. And I almost see it like a beacon. Like, that's how I would think about it. And one of my teachers would always talk about how the fixed stars are different than the planets, because the stars, you know, well, we're all made of stars. Everything on Earth is made of exploded star matter. And so we have this, like, direct ability to communicate with stars, which is different than the planets. The planets are archetypes and we can work with them. But the stars, we have a direct link with them. Which also made me think, with your Chiron sitting right there with Sirius, we have the brightest star in the sky that we can actually communicate with, that we're made up of the same matter. Sitting on that, I thought, that's a prominent thing. And when you look at kind of the basics of Sirius, I mean, it's known to give honor, to give wealth, to bring passion. It's known for, like, being very fortunate turns in life. So if we were having, I mean, I suppose we're having a little session. If we were having a longer session, I would be saying that there could be a lot of potential for you to dig into this and then to really use it out there, you know, to share it out there with people. The seventh house to me is all about all kinds of partnerships in all kinds of ways. But it's sharing. Yours is in Cancer, so that's a different flavor than our other two. And maybe you could share how that's felt for you. You know, for me, that Chiron and Cancer always had a sense of woundedness. There's something around needs being met, and sometimes it's emotional needs being met, and sometimes for people, you know, it's straight not feeling like life feeds them, or that life has been able to feed them, or that they're even able to feed themselves. So it runs kind of the gamut. Some people it's family. So if you could share just briefly what that feels like for you, that would help me.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I would say it would be emotional needs for sure, but it's interesting because, like, I like let people do whatever they want to do because, I mean, pretty much that's what I want to do. So I hold that space for other people, but, you know, I don't step on their toes, so I don't really get emotional about what they do. But then they don't think I'm emotional because of that. And then, like, they project that onto me, and that's what makes me, like, that's when my emotional needs aren't getting met to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if we think about like compensation, I wonder if part of your strategy is if I don't show that part so much, or if I don't, you know, put that out there so much, then, you know, that's sort of a way to avoid, you know, I think like if we don't share our emotions, we don't put our needs out there with people.
Right.
So that's definitely something, you know, that you can.
Yeah, and I've been navigating that a lot lately too, because I work at a store where I meet people every day, so it's like I can work on that every day because I can just own it with people every day as much as possible until I feel safe and secure doing it.
Yeah. How do you feel about your own feelings? Are you comfortable with them? Like, do you feel that they might overtake you if you let them all out? Do you feel like you have to somehow control them? I'm curious, like with your emotional nature, what is your relationship with it?
Yeah, for a long time, they would overtake me because when I was younger, I would like kind of black out and like be angry, you know, like just, yeah, pretty much just had anger issues a lot. But now I guess the way more I work with my emotions is I kind of just watch them in like this really Aquarian kind of way because I'm into like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. So I can literally watch my emotions and see what organ systems they go to and know how I feel based off of that.
Yeah, I know that Chiron in Cancer, particularly when as like in its most healthy expression, you know, it's able to take care of itself, right? Cancer is all about self-care, but it's not just how we eat. It's like caring for, like, and it's funny, like in some ways I think, so I know Taurus has a lot to do with the physical body, but to me, Cancer has a lot to do with our humanity. Like Cancer to me is a sign that rules all the stages of life in some respects, right? It's, you know, infancy to death, like the fourth house, we look at sort of all these vulnerabilities, what I would say, you know, Cancer is, and so Cancer is comfortable with sometimes like the gross needy things of being a human. You know, the fact that, for example, you know, when we're small, we need to have our needs met. And then when we're old, we have other needs we have met, right? And so like the idea of the stages of life itself. So someone who is able to really come to a place of, to not just nurture themselves physically, but to emotionally be able to say, I have a center within me, and I know that that's where I root into myself. Like to me, also Cancer is like a sense of rootedness in my self-identity, meaning I've created myself from the inside of me. You know, it's like taking like the psychological foundation or the feelings and then feeling into it, but then saying, and now here's who I'm going to be in the world. So Cancer to me is the formation of the identity. Leo's the one that takes it out and puts it on the stage, but Cancer is the formation of the identity. And that comes from getting deep enough into our watery nature, you know, which to me is a psychological foundation. So when you do that for yourself and you come to a place of saying, you know, I feel my own neediness, right? Because I got a lot of Cancer in my chart, and there's a lot of neediness there. And I'm a capable person, but it comes up in weird situations and weird times where it's infantile and it's needy. And if I feel, for example, that someone is not paying attention to my feelings, or they're not caring about me, or all of a sudden I recognize, wait a second, you know, my needs aren't getting met here. The Cancer, you know, it has a tendency to either shut down in that situation, right? Go into the shell, or it can be, you know, overly dramatic about trying to get its needs met. But when you come from a place of I meet my own, you teach people how to take care of themselves. Truly, right? You know, it's like the most nurturing thing. It's like the best version of mother that anyone can imagine. Or
Yeah,
just
when I first started working with astrology, I would like do meditations and just put my finger on a planet and meditate on like an idealistic version of it, and then every day try to like become it. So it would be like that Chiron in the 7th house was just like help people become emotionally secure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's like that's it. Because I always think about the totem as the great blue heron, right? I think about Cancer this way.
That's my totem. That's literally my totem.
That's good. That's awesome. I have it's a big thing of mine too. But that great blue heron, and this is also true with the low heaven of the chart, right down on the IC. To me, the blue heron represents that standing in emotional self-sufficiency through the water, down anchoring into the earth. So it's like in some sense that the mastery of the emotional nature, and not in a controlling nature, but in a being able to stand steadfast as all the flows happen. Cancer is emotional. It's never going to change. You know,
Right.
we're going to laugh, and then we're going to cry, and then we're going to, and whether we show it or not, that's always going to be happening. But when people can feel their own emotional self-sufficiency, they can actually go about and live their lives, in ways that are fruitful. That Cancer, in my mind, that whole piece of like anchoring oneself or having a ballast in a boat, nothing else in life. And this is why so many people get pushed back to the Cancer in the 4th house archetype, because they haven't done that thoroughly. And so they try to go be Leo, but the self-image and the emotional self-sufficiency isn't there. So they try to put a show on the stage without anything to root them down, which means that when they're not applauded, they literally crumble inside because they don't have a self-sustaining system. They move into partnership, and their neediness was never addressed within themselves. So then they're working out mommy and daddy issues and all kinds of things in partnerships, right? Which we do anyway to some extent. But I'm saying the whole rest of the wheel gets crippled. So one of the greatest gifts you can give people is to teach them the strength that comes from the Cancer archetype. Because in my mind, everything builds on top of it. And you have Jupiter conjunct Chiron, which means to what? Jupiter wants to expand anything it touches. It's interesting though, because they're both retrograde, and Jupiter retrograde to me speaks to needing to reclaim your own confidence, reclaim your trusting your own intuition. There's an element anytime Jupiter is retrograde, almost always confidence is involved.
Yeah, and to me too, I feel that Jupiter retrograde right there is like I heard Kim Marie one time say like throw it to the opposite side of the chart when you have the retrograde. So it was like I wasn't emotionally secure about expressing my ideas with other people. Yep. So like throwing it to the other side made me express my ideas and then be emotionally secure about it.
Yeah. And so then neediness becomes a different thing. Like when I'm not saying that I'm in any way perfect about it, but I've done a lot of work with all my Cancer, and there's a ton of it, right? So for me, when my neediness comes up, I'm better able actually to say, like if it's my partner, I can say, I don't know what's happening exactly right now. I can feel that I'm becoming very sensitive and very defensive and very needy. And I can say that, right? I can own that from a place of, instead of all of a sudden needing to get someone else to do something to make it better. Because Cancer, it wants to soothe those feelings, which is why, it can be an eater or a drinker or whatever, watch emotional movies, whatever it takes, right? It wants to, in some ways, like it wants to manipulate its own emotions versus ride them out.
And I do that. And I've done, that's how I learned how to like even feel my own emotions. When I was in college, I would drink until I could feel and express it.
Yeah. So those are all.
Go ahead.
No, you, please.
Okay. And like, also I would just like this is a funny one, but I'm into so many therapeutics, but like I would listen to like R&B songs and like especially on like rainy days and like look out the window and like just go into that emotion like all the way, and it was like so therapeutic for me.
Yeah. And in some respects, the wound itself is therapeutic for you, like the emotional wound, which you can call medicine or whatever you want, but that whole Chiron experience, especially with Jupiter sitting on it, like there's something about it opening wider and bigger and you having greater awareness of it as well, and I think even thinking like feeling more truth around it. And we all have different ways that we do that. But regardless, in my, like I said, it's in that placement of And when we add Sirius there as well, I would say, you know, think about like Jupiter is king of the gods and you have the queen of the stars both on your Chiron.
Yeah.
So, you know, how you want to live into that is up to you, but there's a lot of brightness around something that can feel dark. And maybe part of what your gift is in coming, you know, to this planet this time is to show how those watery realms that sometimes feel, you know, dark or scary, or that we can't make sense of them, or that we're at the mercy of them, whatever, maybe that you have a way of bringing a lightness to it or a brightness to it, or, you know, but it feels it for sure. And man, you got a packed first house.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and a Sagittarius rising, so, you know, the first house to me has a lot to do, I mean, one, it's having spontaneous experience of ourselves, right? It's instinctually moving into life. But it also, to me, was the house of the pioneer, you know? It's going into uncharted territory. And you can take other people there as well, right? And that can be whole new experiences of what it means to go on the emotional roller coaster, you know? Or what those feelings even mean, or how we relate to those feelings, or what we do with those feelings, or how creative those feelings can actually be, because truly, a lot of that is a great source of your creativity. You know, you pull from that creativity, but all that stuff too, in Capricorn in the first house means you're meant to manifest something, you're actually meant to do something with it. So how you work, you know, that back and forth, you know, you will figure that out. But yeah, that's a strong signature. And Pallas Athena, I think you asked a question about Pallas Athena as well.
Yeah, and I also found out too that my dark moon Lilith, I believe it's dark moon Lilith. Yeah, it's like trine, and it's an exact trine. It's at 11 degrees too.
It is, and Pallas is in an exact square.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And Pallas Athena, to me, is what we champion. You know, who we champion and how we champion. And so when we add that also to Chiron, then there's a whole other element. And like I said, like you have a champion asteroid goddess, you have king of the gods, and you have the brightest star in the sky.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's nice. It paints a whole different picture to me. And, you know, with all your Aquarius energy too, you know, you can find most unusual ways to, you know, to work with things, and perhaps with some objectivity as well. You know, one thing I think with, although here's the thing, like Pluto in the 11th house, and even Sun in Aquarius to some extent, you know, there can be a tendency to detach from something, you know, a little too much, like to, I mean, you know, it's like, oh, okay, if I just will dissociate a little bit, then I'll be fine over here. And the wound is actually in a very different kind of sign, right? Cancer is the opposite. It's about really getting into like feeling the feeling. So, but I think from what you've articulated, you've already experienced some of those, I guess, periods in your life of not being as in touch with them or not expressing what you need or whatnot. But that will always, to some extent, be a dynamic, you know. You've got some interesting interplay in your chart. I mean, Pluto in the 11th, the polarity is the 5th. But you have South Node in Leo and North Node in Aquarius. So in some ways, I think you're trying to balance the Leo and the Aquarius all the way around. You know, so to me, when I see sort of those reverses that way, meaning that we see that the past, you know, is both in Aquarius and Leo archetypes, and that the future Dharma is also in both archetypes, it really speaks to me to bridging. How do we bridge those two together? In other words, how do you maintain enough objectivity but still be heart-centered enough to be available for it? You know, right. Leo is being fully present in something. You know, Aquarius is more, you know, the Spock observer of something. But together, ultimately, you know, they're the combination of the full shining self, and then also how that contributes to the rest of the world. And there is definitely something about that Chiron Jupiter, you know, thing going on. I think that's a big part of it. A big part of how you do it or how you are doing it.
Right. Yeah, I can feel that.
What else? What other questions do you have? What other thoughts do you have?
I kind of always look at the Neptune across from it too, and then I also, it's like, is that an in conjunction? Like, would you consider that in conjunction within my chart? I guess just because I look at Chiron and Uranus like so closely tied together in my mind and heart, it's just like I automatically look to that and see that that's the bridge right there between how I like have that Leo and Aquarius thing. Like that is right there. Like to be emotionally secure around other people. Like that was what helped me the most out of all that. Like not to say that I've resolved it because I haven't even made it to my first Saturn return yet, but I can feel that though. Like I can feel that like within myself too. And I've even gotten, I guess some people call them downloads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, things will just come through me. So it's like some things it's just like I don't always have the technical know-how, but it's just like the whole Aquarian, like I just know type of thing going on there too.
Yeah, I think, and so one of the things to pay attention to is to have a balance between the I know and what I'm actually feeling and what I'm actually able to, stay for, right? So those are the combination. So
I like changed my vernacular around like, because I know Aquarian is like detached, but I try to make myself to say like non-attached. So it's like I'm not attaching to the situation fully, but I'm still here feeling though.
Yeah, and that's that beautiful interplay between the two. I have enough objectivity that I'm not lost in it, but I'm present enough that I'm fully available. Like I've not separated myself from it in an unhealthy kind of way. Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes, the wounding around Cancer sometimes can, like, I was alluding to it earlier, but it can be, if we question our own emotional stability, or if we question the validity of our feelings, or even just not comfortable with our feeling nature at all, it can be easy to bypass it. And sometimes we don't even realize we're bypassing it because, like, and you have a moon in Gemini, so there's a real probability with moon in Gemini that one intellectualizes their feelings. I'm talking about my feelings and sharing my feelings and understanding my feelings, but am I actually feeling my feelings? And there's a difference between them. So I think you know what I mean. So you can play around with that for yourself, but there's definitely a difference. And some people, especially with the moon in Gemini, people can think, because moon in Gemini likes to talk, right? So usually people are pretty open about sharing things, but there is a difference between slowing down and actually feeling something. And that's a big part of what the Cancer piece is. And sometimes that woundedness can be around being uncomfortable or not trusting the process of just feeling things. So the Chiron, yes, I would say it's in opposition with Uranus and with Neptune, which definitely adds, there's just sort of this, I think opposition, especially between the 7th and the 1st house, can be the struggle between what I do with others or in partnership, and then what I do on my own, and whether I can have both and how those two work. There can be a push and pull between, should I just be on my own because the partnership takes this from me, or the partnership requires this thing, or the relationship takes this thing. So sometimes that can happen, with that back and forth. Anytime with the 7th and 1st house, that can happen. Those two pieces. Also, there's in my mind, anytime, those are big hitters, outer planets. I mean, Neptune, like we were talking about with Shelly, Neptune wants to break down false illusions. It wants you to have more truth. And actually, Neptune is nothing but the moment. Like true Neptune experience, there is nothing but the moment. The past and the present converge in the moment, and there is no thing. That's why, like, Pisces and Neptune is everything and no thing. So when that is touching Chiron, there's something around that woundedness of the Chiron in Cancer in the 7th house that Neptune wants to somehow soften and, like, almost fuzz out your belief enough or your experience enough that you get to more truth of it. That you feel more of what it really is, that maybe even that you're more present with it, or that you have more compassion with it. But Neptune, generally, you know, it's that's probably enough to say about that. And then in combination, Uranus generally wants to liberate, you know, wants us to break free from something, some old way of doing things. So when I see two things in contact with something like that, it makes me really think, okay, what's really going on with this wound? You know, how has it been, how have you been doing it or not doing it? You know, Chiron retrograde, and retrogrades always talk about in some sense of a needing to reclaim things, you know, to reclaim and redefine and to reintegrate something. So if you believe in the past life perspective, you could say that potentially this wounded healer piece was something that you didn't do, you weren't doing for some reason. It got put on the side. Definitely. Maybe you're too busy working on other things, or there was some reason why you couldn't do it, or you didn't want to do it. Who cares what the reason is, right? But now there's this thing about really needing to reintegrate it. You need to feel. You need to feel, and there's something about that feeling that is your ticket to working with other people and helping them with their feelings. And in a way that is not stuck or wallowing in it. And I think that you've got this great setup for how you can find that balance, like we talked about, between I can step outside and see myself, but now I can go back in myself and actually have the experience.
Right.
Versus, you know, a lot of times people want to choose just one or the other. So I think both of those planets, both Uranus and Neptune, I think they're all working with the equation. And maybe it's even speaking to, you know, how you can bring new ways of compassion and healing, or with Uranus, like new revolutionary genius to how we work with what we consider to be the wounded parts of ourselves. And maybe you know, I mean, you know, whatever. But that's
perfect. That's literally perfect. A lot of things you're saying are just like, even the wording is just really nice, you know, and it's true.
I think it's a lovely signature of possibility for how it could really feed people. And like I said, I come back to Cancer, like Cancer at its best, I can't remember who made up the saying, but Cancer said, you know, until it learns to feed itself, you know, it feeds off of the world. And when Cancer learns to feed itself, it then feeds the world. And that's, you know, and if we get to whatever extent, you know, we can support people in that process of giving themselves what they need, that's really the best chance we have at us, in my opinion, making anything really better, because it starts with what we do with ourselves.
Yeah. And a lot of it too, I mean, for some reason, it just doesn't even feel like this life. It feels like I'm deconditioning from previous lives, though, like for the most part. Because even I talked to I worked with a shaman, and he told me, he was just like, basically like, this life is nothing. Like, you have to go, he's like, for you have to go like far, far back to see it. And even when you're talking about the Neptune thing, I'll talk to somebody and then I'll see them kind of like as somebody else from something that happened before. And in that moment, like, that just like kind of, I guess like my soul just like comes back to me, that part of my soul that was left behind. It's like all of my parts are just reintegrating.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense with all that focus on the first house, right? It's bringing it back within. And maybe if let's just go with the theory that you've been out there. We don't know where out there is. Like, maybe it was serious, and maybe that's why there's that, you know, we don't know what these things are. And to me, it doesn't even matter what the exact perfect story is, but let's just say you were out there. And now part of that emphasis with the first house is everything reintegrating in your like living body now. You know, and that you know, Uranus in the first house can carry a lot of memories of trauma to the body, you know, memories of things happening to the body, of, you know, I mean, you have also Mars in the first house. You have all these things in the first house, which to me speaks a lot to bringing things back in your being, which makes me wonder, maybe you were just out for so long. And which means there would be an added emphasis in this lifetime of staying with yourself. Seems to have been the theme today. I've had that conversation now with more than one person about like staying with ourselves. Because if there's something magical about all that stuff you bring in, but the only way that magic becomes available is through your humanity in this lifetime, that's worth it. that's totally worth it to me. I mean, to me, that's more than worth it.
Yeah, I feel that.
And also the fact that you were, having these conversations before your first Saturn return, that's also, it just speaks to, that your interest is already there.
Yeah, and I already work with plant medicine too, and the Kabbalah, and chart, And then also the nodes of my planets, it gets deep. I can see into the mechanism pretty deep for not having that much technical know-how. It's like
but also, Cameron, I think with the Sun North Node conjunction in Aquarius in the second house, the second house is also the house of embodiment. So you've got first house and the second house, and those are the houses. The sixth house is health. But for me, the first and the second house, that's so much your physical body. And if you're bringing spirit, and if you're bringing, all these past experiences, which, Aquarius can represent that, but they're in the second house. So it's like, how are you going to ground them? Right. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and I think, and this is not necessarily from just the chart, but like my intuition tells me that you have a lot of stuff, wherever you got it, whatever, you have a lot of stuff, but I really think that it's full benefit in this lifetime for your evolution and for everybody else around you. It somehow has to come through a body. I'm not even sure that, that you would be, this is a lot of energy kind of forcing things into the body. And even Chiron in Cancer, if we think about woundedness, that can't even be a woundedness around the needs of. Like I said, and to me, in my mind, Cancer is kind of the most human sign. Well, wouldn't it make sense that you might have wounding around your kind of humanness if you're used to being out there and not having to be contained in any sort of a thing that has limitations, or that, Yeah,
it's an uncomfortable suit sometimes.
Yeah. But so think about how many people who are out there doing, something similar, or that is like, we are in this suit, at least for now.
Right.
And so I think that part of this to me is like finding new ways of how you can really use the suit, and even expand it beyond. It's like, it's beyond a suit, it's your, even vessel is not like enough of it. Like it literally, it's your instrument for how you're going to do things.
Right. Yeah, and I can feel that even in my nervous system. Like my nervous system gets dehydrated kind of easily. It's the Aquarian thing, and then I got that stellium in Capricorn, so it's like my musculoskeletal system kind of gets tense too. Mm-hmm. But in that way, it makes me take my time and nurture myself too as well.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in Capricorn, stuff in the second house. That's density. It's density. That's one way I would say it. Like, I think you're learning a lot of lessons about density and how energy moves in density, and our perceptions around energy and density.
Yes, definitely. Yes, so many interesting things I could share what happened in the past year. It just, were you speaking on that density thing, like somebody, because I work in a place that has an apothecary area, and I'm always there, and like somebody can walk in, and when they feel in that space, I can feel like where their densest at, and I can like kind of feel what organ system, or like if it's what emotion it is, just based off of that. And it's so crazy. It's so crazy. I don't know.
It's amazing.
So many things are just happening, and I don't know, but it makes me even feel good that all that stuff's in the first house. I'm like, I don't know, and maybe I don't need to know. Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah, there's a big element to that. Like the first house, like you don't have to have a particular plan. You're not supposed to have an answer for first house stuff. Right. But all the Capricorn says, you need the commitment and you need to take responsibility. But the first house is the freedom to experience it. And the first house is also just raw energy. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you'd have access to tapping into energy.
Yeah, I can feel it.
Wow, it's exciting.
that responsibility thing though. Sometimes it catches me sometimes. So.
Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see
And
it.
it actually feels like I have like a responsibility that's like, I don't know, it just feels heavy sometimes.
Capricorn in general is not, it's a heavy feeling sign. Yeah. Capricorn at some level knows that it has things to give back to society. It knows that it needs to. Linda uses the word, we talk about Saturn and satisfaction, right? There's a certain level of satisfaction that comes through following through to your goals. That is taking responsibility for yourself. That is developing maturity. And all of that is opposite, right? So let's think about this way. If Chiron is in Cancer, part of the woundedness could be around not wanting. Like, here's one example of a Chiron in Cancer wound. Not wanting to grow up. Like, the wound can be around staying an infant forever at some level. And Capricorn on all that stuff on the other side says, you have to grow this up in your way, but it is, the Capricorn on the other side truly is, in my mind, saying it's about maturity.
Yeah.
And so there can be a heaviness that comes with it, but you also get to define that how you want to define it. But you also know, like, if you have, past memories of lives of being a free agent, then there's going to be a natural reaction to now being, well, what do you mean I have to not only be in this body, but now I have to be responsible and mature, and now on top of that I have to even be emotionally mature, and there can be a whole list of to not, and Saturn in the first house doesn't always feel easy either. Saturn in the first house can feel tight, like, limited, but that's because, it wants to strengthen that.
Right, definitely, 1,000%.
Yeah, and so what I think is that if you need a lot of energy there, because for whatever reason you're not. Part of Capricorn too is like setting healthy boundaries around things, but like it's also just straight definition. So like a Saturn in the first house means like we need. And I keep coming back to, like, for some reason I just think that there's something about just being in your body, and that's part of it too. Like you need to be in it.
Hello, it's Linda.
Yeah.
Hi, Tara. We'll have to wind down because I have a technician here who's here to work on my solar power system. He's been waiting for like 10 minutes, and I really do have to go now, and we'll have to end this meeting. So would you like to wind down in the next few minutes? Yeah,
Cameron, do you have anything else? And then.
Oh, I could go for days. I'm good.
Okay.
Appreciate
you. Come back, Cameron.
All right, I will.
I can't wait.
So Linda, I'm good. So unless you or someone else has something they want to share,
Okay. Could you just click on stop share at the top of the screen? Just
yes.
For everybody. And does anyone want to make a quick comment, a quick question?
I want to say thank y'all all for creating this, and whoever helped create this, because this is great for me. I appreciate y'all so much.
I agree. Thank you, Linda, and everyone else who puts all their efforts into it.
And thank you so much, Tara. What a fantastic meeting. I really enjoyed the Q&As with the 3 volunteers.
Me too.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we'll see you again soon. So bye for now.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Just excellent.
Good night.
Loved it.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you.
Totally awesome. Thank you.